Psalms 3 and 4, 12 and 13, 28 and 55. I have a good friend who named his last child Simcha, and I said, what does that name mean? And he said, well, he's a Hebrew scholar, and he said it means joy. And that comes from a verse like 4:7, our reading today. You have put Simcha in my heart. What's so amazing about that verse is that it's an example of what we call an individual lament, Psalm 4 and Psalm 3. It seems to be coming from that time period when David was running from Absalom. We, of course, are the ones who categorize the Psalms. No one sat down in that day and said, I think I'm going to write an individual lament. They wrote, and we look back and we categorize them into things like corporate lament, corporate petition, individual petition, corporate praise, individual praise. There's all sorts of ways to slice and dice the Psalms and the styles of poetry we find. But let's talk about the idea of an individual lament at this point, because we have great examples in our readings today. It seems to be, these individual laments seem to be driven by like a triangle of effect, where a person causes the writer grief of some kind. The writer then expresses his grief to God, and he'll say things like, well, my God, why have you forsaken me? He's asking God, in a sense, to do two things, both to save him, and that word, of course, often has physical overtones, or to solve the problem of the person causing the grief. Okay? So here are some examples of that today, and most of the time we don't have the careful description of what the problem is in the Psalms. They're just too general. But here's an example from Psalm 3. Lord, they have increased to trouble me. Many are they who rise up against me. Many are they who say of me, there is no help for him in God. And then verses 3 and 4. I cried to the Lord with my voice, and he heard me from his holy hill. O God, they're coming after me. This again may have been said of David about Absalom and his friends. O God, come and save me. Chapter 22, or Psalm 22, very famously, my God, why have you forsaken me, and why are you so far from helping me and from the words of my groaning? And then in verses 16 through 18, for dogs have surrounded me, the assembly of the wicked has enclosed me, they pierced my hands and my feet. I count all my bones, they look and stare at me, they divide my garments among them and cast lots for my clothing. A very bad day is being experienced by the psalmist, and it's all caused by this unexplained problem of someone who's really going after him. Actually, then in Psalm 55, in fact, our reading for today, it's interesting. In verses 12 and 13, verses 1 to 3. Give ear to my prayer, O God, do not hide yourself from my supplication. So here is that plea, Psalm 55, verse 1. And then verse 12, for it is not an enemy who reproaches me, then I could bear it. But, verse 13, it was you, a man my equal, my companion, and my acquaintance. This person is not an enemy, but a friend. And then down in verse 23 of Psalm 55, but you, O God, shall bring them down to the pit of destruction, bloodthirsty and deceitful men. The word there for deceitful, translated into Aramaic, which Jesus would have known, is the word shakar. Shakar, that's a Q. And there's good evidence that when we come upon the name Judas Iscariot, we don't know what the word Iscariot means. It's not a second name or a last name, of course. It's a description of Judas. And Iscariot may very well come from shakar, meaning friend turned enemy, using Psalm 55 as a story, again, of how Jesus would have felt there in the Garden of Gethsemane, where a good friend turned on him. So, let's talk then about just final thoughts there, about these laments and how they work. First of all, of course, the raw grief, the raw feelings, the statements, I think are all there again for us. Have we not learned that the Psalms give us the permission to be honest with God? And again, we never have to worry that God will shy away from us or put his hand over his mouth and say, I can't believe you thought that or think that or feel that way. It's never going to happen. Often these statements here, if we read the Psalms carefully, these "O God" statements are mixed even side by side with statements of truth. We saw a line that says, "But you, O Lord, are a shield for me." I learned long ago, I try to live it, it's hard to remember this, but I wrote it down and I often think of it. Never give up what you have learned in the light or let me say it the way I wrote it down. Don't give up in the dark what you have come to believe in the light. And that's what the psalmist is trying to remember. This whole storyline, or this interaction, of course, doesn't come from a theology book. Nobody got their theology, of course, from a book in this day. They got it from the story of Israel, where God is said to rule over the sons of men. And the psalmist knows that, but he's struggling with it. And so this is simply something on the line of, "Oh God, if you're in control, why am I in such pain?" It's the story of Job, extended really another 1,000 years, because again, we are now in the life of David, halfway through our Old Testament chronologically. And lastly, the word sovereignty is a word that's often discussed in theology classes. It's not a word in Hebrew. There is no word for sovereignty. Sovereignty becomes a discussion because of something like this, and we take the whole package deal and we think, how does this work? And here is what I would recommend. Sovereignty is the belief on this person's part that God's rule is such that it always trumps this. That you can always say, even in the midst of your worst pain, I am not on plan B. God is in control, even of this person in some real way, so that whatever happens in my life, and here's Psalm 4:7, you have put simcha, joy, in my heart.